Have you ever had a situation where it was not fair?
Oh, yeah.
I remember one time as a kid, and we were always told to ask permission to go across the street to play with our friends. So we were outside, and our friends from across the street, they came outside, and we couldn't cross the street without permission. So my sister went in and asked my mom if we could go across the street. My mom said yes. My sister came out and said, yeah, we can go across the street. We went across the street, and within minutes of arriving across the street, I heard this: Michael, Donovan, McCamey, Janice, Lee, you get in this house right now. And it didn't sound quite like that. It sounded much higher pitched. And it was my mom. And so we went trudging home. I'm oblivious. And apparently what had happened was my sister had interrupted my mom on the phone, to which my mom ignored her. Because that's what my mom did when you interrupted an adult. You waited your turn. You waited. And so my mom had said yes to somebody on the phone. My sister took that as yes to go across the street. We went across the street. Now, I got punished for that. Fair? Not fair. I want you to write a letter to my mom this next week and let her know. But that's a pretty trivial matter, isn't it? You get a spanking as a kid. That was not just the only spanking I ever got. And, I deserved more than what I got. So, in the big scale of spankings, I'm on the plus side. But there are things in life that really bother us sometimes, huh? There's some things in life that you weep about those things. And I want to read a story to you. It's written by Pastor Mark Buchanan in his book, Your God is Too Safe. And he wrote this story about this lady, Bonnie, and her daughter, Caitlin. And he says this. He says, in the town where I live, a little girl is dying. Her name is Caitlin. My daughter, Sarah, attended preschool with Caitlin. And on the days when I picked Sarah up, I would often find her and Caitlin playing together at the swing set, pushing one another in great stomach-fluttering arcs, or in the sandbox piling pail upon pail of crumbly sand into a kind of a replica of a ruined Acropolis. They were two very vigorous, joyful 4-year-olds. Caitlin's mother, Bonnie, came to pick her up one day, and something went terribly awry. Bonnie wrote this to me. Have you ever had a day that you know has changed your life forever? A day that you would do anything to black out, just fast forward past? I arrived at the preschool Caitlin was attending, and she was standing on the playground looking down at the grass. One of her playmates said several times, Caitlin, your mommy's here. I spoke to her, and there was no reaction. So I approached her and lifted her chin up with my finger. When I did this, I realized there was no reaction and something was wrong. Her eyes were vacant, and she had no recognition of me. I immediately called for the preschool teacher. Caitlin began to waver. I knelt down beside her and laid her across my lap. The teacher called her name and did other things to get her to respond. Her eyes were open but not focused. They rolled to the right, and she remained limp. The ambulance was called. I carried her inside and started to lay her on her side. When I did this, she began to cry and call for mommy. When the paramedics arrived, I was holding her and kissing her and weeping. We were taken to the hospital by ambulance. I was told she had a seizure, but she would be fine. Tests were ordered. The tests agreed with the initial diagnosis. Caitlin would be fine. But Caitlin wasn't fine. She grew increasingly pale. Her speech started to slur, and she began to fumble things, stumbling often. She got more and more clumsy. She couldn't hold things. She walked into walls and door jambs, and she fell down a lot. Her speech worsened. Words started coming out in guttural chunks, in sharp, jagged howls, in throaty grunts, and in mournful groans. The doctor kept ordering tests. Then one day, Caitlin's mother and father got the news that they had dreaded and expected. Caitlin was dying. She has Batten's disease, a rare and incurable congenital degenerative neural disorder. Her muscles are petrifying. They are now hard like wood. They will soon be hard like stone. They will harden until one day she can no longer swallow or breathe. Caitlin's parents, her brothers, her grandparents, her aunts and uncles and cousins, her friends, her church family, all watch beautiful little Caitlin die a slow death. And they can do nothing. Caitlin's mother is a Christian and has drenched her bed with tears. She has beaten her fists bloody on heaven's door, trying to get the owner to open it and give her bread. She attends a church full of godly, caring people. They pray. Other people at other churches pray. They pray for many things: strength for the parents, wisdom for the doctors, comfort for Caitlin. But mostly, they pray that God will heal Caitlin. God hasn't answered that prayer yet. In truth, few now think he will. The people who live beside Caitlin won the lottery. More than $600,000. I know almost nothing about these people except that they have a lovely house. The house, I am told, is already paid for. It has been paid for a long time. These people, I understand, had a good, abundant life even before the jackpot win. I'm not sure why they buy lottery tickets, or if they don't, why others buy lottery tickets for them. I'm not sure if they ever prayed to win the lottery, or if they ever pray at all. But they won the lottery, more than $600,000, and in the house next door, Caitlin is dying. Seem fair? I don't know if it's fair or not. But life is not fair. Let's get one thing straight right now. Life is not fair. There's lopsidedness, there's randomness, there's pitfalls, there's windfalls. Who knows what will be given to whom? Who will be sick? Who's going to be rich? Who's going to be beautiful? Who's going to be disfigured? Who knows? Have you ever said, God, that's not fair? Yeah, we have. Well, we're not the first to say that. Habakkuk is going to say it as well, because we're not alone in this fight for fairness. In fact, I don't know that we ought to fight for fairness. But this seeming randomness in our lives gives us pause, and often we cry out to God saying things are unfair. Well, I want to draw your attention to Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 12 through the first verse of chapter 2. And it says this. And remember, this is a period of time in Habakkuk's life where he has asked God why he doesn't answer prayer. Why doesn't he see the things that are going on? Why doesn't he give justice? Why doesn't he punish cruel people? And now God has responded with, yeah, I'm going to take care of that. I'm going to bring judgment upon my people. And now we find Habakkuk saying, well, that's really not fair because we're better than they are. Notice what he says here in verse 12 of chapter 1. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have ordained them as a judgment, and you, O Rock, have established them for reproof. You who are of purer eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong, why do you look idly at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? You make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his dragnet, so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore, he sacrifices to his nets and makes offerings to his dragnet. For by them he lives in luxury, and his food is rich. He then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever? I will take my stand at the watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. Now remember, Habakkuk has a problem here. He lived during a time where there was national revival. In fact, during Josiah the king's reign, they had really established in Judah one of the great true God-honoring kings in Josiah. Now, at that time, he brought the people from waywardness back to their recognition of who God was and what God was all about, and they began to worship God again. They began to hear him through the prophet. They began to respond to God in the way they lived life. Now, Josiah died an untimely death at age 40. And at age 40, he was replaced by another less than God-honoring king, another wicked king, and the people fell away. So during Habakkuk's time, he has seen them go from the peak of spirituality down into the depths and doldrums of idolatry. And he now asks God, why is this happening? Why have you allowed this thing to happen to us? And why are we now so far away from what we once were? He cries out, God, why, God, do you let this happen and you will not listen to my prayer? And God answered, remember last week, I will answer your prayer and I will bring judgment, and I'm going to use a people that are foreign to you, a pagan people that do not honor me, to bring judgment on you. And that has just caused Habakkuk to go into a quandary and to question who God is and why he is doing this. Now remember, Habakkuk's name is the wrestler. It's really the embracer. He embraces God, but at times, in order to embrace God, we have to wrestle with him a little bit, don't we? Have you ever seen a situation in life where you just don't get it? You just don't understand it. We've seen all of that. We have seen tragedy happen in lives around us. We have seen people suffer with disease, and we wonder why them and why not somebody else. We've seen people that don't honor God at all, and they thrive and they prosper, and we wonder, how does that happen? Why doesn't God make the good people, experience blessing and the bad people experience cursing? And we're going to discover today, back in Deuteronomy chapter 25, where God has promised. In fact, in chapter 24 and 25, there's a little diatribe there by God, and he talks about, here's what I'm going to do to bless you. If you do these things, I will bless you. If you do these things, I'm going to bring curse upon you. And the people of Judah have already seen their northerly neighbors, Israel, go into captivity. Israel no longer exists as a nation. There's just Judah now. So you would think that they would learn some lessons, wouldn't you? Have you ever learned a lesson from somebody else's experience? I would much rather learn them that way. I would much rather have people learn lessons the hard way, and then I just get to vicariously learn through them. So if you have learned a lesson the hard way, let me know about them. And that way I don't have to repeat the same mistakes in order to get that lesson learned, because God wants us to learn those things. Now, remember when Habakkuk first starts out in chapter 1, he says, it seems like, God, that I pray to you and you don't hear me. And you don't hear me, and the reason that Habakkuk didn't think that God heard him was because he didn't respond. We've all talked to people, spoken to people, given instructions to people, and we wonder if they hear us or not. Because we evaluate their hearing based on what they do in response. If you heard me, you'd do what I say. I told you the story about Cindy asking me to take out the trash. And in my head, I say, yeah, take out the trash. Sure, I'm going to do that. And I sit there. And I'm going to take out the trash, but, nobody tells me what to do, so I'm going to do it in my time. And, pretty soon the trash isn't taken out, and she says, did you hear me? And I say, yeah, I heard you. Well, what's the deal? And that's the response that Habakkuk had. If God heard him, why didn't God do something? Because obviously Habakkuk knew what to do. And we often know what to do, and we ask God to do things, and we tell God to do things, and we think that he should respond to us. But remember, he's going to wrestle with God here a little bit, and I encourage you to wrestle with God as well. Now, many times when we wrestle with God, we get a little bit arrogant, though. And it may sound as if Habakkuk has gotten a little bit arrogant here with God, doesn't it? I want you to be careful when you wrestle with God that you do not disrespect him. Never, ever, ever disrespect God. Okay? Because God has the power of what? God has the power of life and death. He has the power of blessing and cursing. God has the power of creating. God has all of the power that there is, and you don't want to disrespect God. Okay, don't disrespect God. And I want to show you here how Habakkuk expresses three things. Okay, in your outline today, you'll find number one, he expresses confidence in who God is. Okay, when you wrestle with God, first you need to know who God is. In Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 12 and 13, here's what he says. He says, are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We shall not die, O Lord. You have ordained them as a judgment. And he's talking here about the Babylonians, the people that are going to come and overtake them. He says, you have ordained them as a judgment, and you, O rock, have established them for reproof. Now circle that word reproof. I don't have it underlined or anything. Reproof means you're using them to show us the error of our ways. Okay, you're using them to show us the error of our ways. You who are of purer eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong. Now, I am told, I'm not a scuba diver. Anybody here a scuba diver? Okay, scuba diver. Okay, when it's dark at night and you're underwater scuba diving and it's pitch black, how do you know where up is? Have you ever thought of that? And what scuba instructors will tell you is to feel your bubbles. Okay, we all know about gravity, we all know about bubbles, right? Bubbles go where? They go to the surface. So if I'm on my side, okay, and I'm thinking I'm upright, and you know how you're weightless in water, so you're sideways, and I feel here bubbles, I know that's the way to the top. There is a way to find the way to the top, isn't there? Now, when we don't trust our senses, we have to rely on some test like that. Now today, what we find is Habakkuk can't trust his senses. So he has to feel for the bubbles, so to speak, to tell which way is up spiritually. When we don't know what to trust, we need to always trust who God is. Who God is. And that's where Habakkuk starts. He starts by trusting who God is. Now it's kind of interesting. There was a survey done among junior hires, and they asked the junior hires, who is God? Describe God to me. And one of them described God this way. He says he's a three-headed dragon. A three-headed dragon. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. A three-headed dragon. Now to this particular junior hire, I guess dragons had all the power that they could ever think of or imagine other than God. And so he described him as a three-headed dragon. There was another one who described him as a transformer. You know, he's the Father, and he transforms into the Son, and then he transforms into the Holy Spirit. You know, sometimes I think we're a little bit like those junior hires. We don't have a really good theology about who God is. Now, we begin to think of God, and we approach him rather ignorantly. So today, I want to help you with if you do have this, your theological ignorance about who God is. And here's what Habakkuk says. This is where he comes back to when he doesn't understand what God is doing. He comes back because he knows who God is. So let's take the first one here. First of all, he says, God is eternally consistent. God is eternally consistent. And where does he say that? He says that right there in verse number 12. Are you not from everlasting? Everlasting. He says, are you not from everlasting? Now, it's interesting here when we think about this eternality of God. Now, sometimes we think of eternity as time lengthened out. Okay, there's just a bunch of time, and so much time that we may not even be able to comprehend it. But I want you to know that eternality really has to do with not being bound by time. God is not bound by time, nor is he bound by space. God is not just here now, but God is everywhere all at the same time, and he is at all times all at the same time. It doesn't make sense to us, but eternality doesn't have to do with a long span of time, but it has to do with God existing beyond time. Time does not limit him. He can do things. If God wanted to, he could do things in the past right now, change all of history, and we would know it automatically. Wouldn't that be a strange thing? You know, for us, time is really a constraining thing. But for God, time does not constrain him in the least bit. Now, God is not surprised by these Babylonians. Okay? And that's what Habakkuk thinks. Oh, if God had just known what these Babylonians were going to do to us, he would have done something different. No, God knew, because he is not bound by time, he knew the beginning of the Babylonians, he knew the interim of the Babylonians, and he knows the end of the Babylonians. He knows when they're going to enter history. He knows what they're going to do throughout history. He knows what's going to end their history. He knows all of that all at the same time, and God says, don't worry about that. And Habakkuk knows that God is an eternal being, and he is eternally consistent. He says, "O Lord my God." Now he's dealing with the very nature of God. He says, "O Lord my God." Two things that he says there. Number one, it's, "O Lord, you are my master. You are the master of me, and I recognize that." Now he also recognizes as Lord that he is the master of everything as well. And he says, "My God, O Lord my God." He begins his complaint here with this statement about his trust in God's eternality and his eternally consistent nature. Now God has promised to be with his people. And he says that, "O Lord my God, my Holy One, we shall not die." He says that. He says, I know we're not going to die. We're not going to cease to exist as a people because I know that you have an eternally consistent plan. I don't understand that plan right now, but I know that you do have that. God has promised to be with his people. And God has promised to be with us no matter where we are in our struggle or in our journey. I've had a bad couple of weeks, these past couple of weeks, just stuff of life, you know, and I'm preaching this message to me more than I am preaching it to you, because I need to be brought back to the roots of who God is. because sometimes I don't understand why he does what he does. So first of all, God is eternally consistent. The second thing that we find here is that stuff there. God is holy. Okay? God is holy. In Exodus chapter 15, verse 11, we go back to when the people are leaving Egypt. And he says, and this is what Moses says, "Who is like you among the gods?" Now he gives this implication that there's more than one God, doesn't he? Now how many gods did the Egyptians have? The Egyptians had a plethora of gods. And he says, God, of all of the gods that we have here in this land, in Egypt, you are the God of all gods. You are the superior God. You are the one true God. And he goes on and asks the question again, who is like you, majestic in holiness? Who is like you, majestic in holiness? Now, the way that Habakkuk says it is this: you are my holy one. Now I want you to write some things down about holiness. Number one, holiness is distinct. It is separate. It's in a class by itself. So when we describe God as holy, we're not calling him the holiest. We're not calling him holier. We're saying that you are the one, only, ultimate, unique, truly holy being. There is no one holy like God. And so when we're called to be holy, and we are called to be holy, aren't we? We ought to aspire to that holiness of God, but yet recognize that we will not attain that uniqueness that only God has. We can be like God maybe in times of our lives where we act righteously and holy, set apart for him, but we will not have that morally pure character that he has. Now, this word holy is an ancient word, and it means to cut or to separate. Now, the way we might say it today is he's a cut above. Now, how many of you like cars? You know, a lot of ladies like cars too, don't you? Now, there are cars, and then there are cars that are cut above, huh? You know, I drive a little Mini Cooper, and I just love that little car. It's just a terrific little car. But there are cars that are cut above that Mini Cooper. I was reading about a car the other day. I forget what it was. It wasn't the Bugatti. It was another car. $1.6 million anyway. It goes from 0 to 60 in 3.3 seconds. 3.3 seconds. That's 1, 2, 3. I'm at 60 miles an hour. I don't know. That's snap your head back. It has to have a headrest. And I just can't imagine the rush that would be going from 0 to 60 in 3.3 seconds. But an incredibly fine car. It would drive much different than my Mini Cooper. Okay. Tremendously different. It's a cut above. But I want you to know that it's just in a class of cars that are a cut above. When we talk about God being a cut above, he's in a class all by himself. There are no other gods that are like him. Now, it also means that he is morally pure. Morally pure. God has never made a choice, never made a decision, never done anything that would be considered less than pure morally. The moral decisions he makes, the moral actions in history that he does, they're all morally pure. We look at the things that he has done. What has he done? You know, what has he allowed? What goes on? And we see things that look like maybe God is not morally pure. Maybe he takes a life here. Maybe he takes a life there. Maybe he takes a life of someone that we love. But we have to understand that those decisions that he makes there are based on a morally pure decision, and they're consistent and they're right with what God wants to do in the world around us. Now, we are asked to be holy as he is holy, aren't we? We are to be holy as God is holy. Now, not are we ever going to achieve moral purity, but we all ought to strive to be morally pure people. We ought to strive. And with the power of God and with him guiding our decisions, we can be a whole lot better than we act, right? We can be a whole lot better than we act if we would just submit and take our time to make decisions. If we would take our time to make decisions, and if we would then consult the decision maker of the universe, and then make decisions that are consistent with that. You know, there used to be a lot of these little bracelets that people would wear that said WWJD, what would Jesus do? That was an attempt to bring to our awareness the holiness to which we are called to live life. And if we could just do what Jesus did, wouldn't we be a lot holier than we are today? Always ask yourself that question before acting, before speaking, before responding. What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? And it might temper some of the things that we do. Okay, there's a third thing that Habakkuk tells us about God, and that is that God is faithful. God is faithful. He's eternally consistent, He is holy, and He is faithful. Habakkuk says this, we will not die. Now God has said, I'm going to bring this foreign nation, and they're going to take you into captivity. They're going to beat you up. They're going to take you and probably do with you whatever they want because they're not really following me, but they're going to mess you over. And it seems almost as if Habakkuk kind of puffs up his chest and says, we're not going to die. You know, you can bring anything against us you want, but you're not going to beat us up. No, you're not. Well, it's not exactly what he's saying because he knows the history of the people of Israel. Now, faithfulness is what? Faithfulness is maintaining the true course of your promises. You've made some promises, so now you're acting in light of your promises. God has promised some things, hasn't He? And I'm going to draw your attention to Genesis chapter 12, verse 2. And here's where God begins to make promises to the nation of Israel. And I think I have this up here. Nope, I don't. Okay. Oh, it is up there already. Thank you. Okay, Genesis 12:2. And I will make of you a great nation. Now, this is the promise that God makes to Abraham before the nation of Israel is ever born. Here's what He says. God speaking to Abraham, and I will make of you a great nation. Now, at this point, does Abraham have any children from which to build this great nation? No, not a one. He's got a wife. Okay, and she's going to try to help him out and do some stuff and gets things all messed up. But nonetheless, he says, I'm going to make a great nation out of you, and I will bless you and make your name great so that you will be a blessing to the whole world, is what he says. You will be a blessing to the whole world. Now, that's the initial promise that God has made to Abram. Now, we come along down the road of history here, and now we have Habakkuk here that's kind of inherited this promise and lives in a nation that's going to bring this promise to fulfillment. And he knows that God has promised that this nation is going to be a blessing to all of the people. So he can say with confidence, we will not die. This nation will not be eradicated. We will continue to live somehow, God, because you have promised that you're going to use us to be a blessing to the entire nation. Now, during World War II, check this out. During World War II, this same nation, Israel, was not a nation. Remember, the northern tribes of Israel, the 10 northern tribes, have already been taken into captivity. They are no longer a nation. They do not become a nation again until, I think it's May 10th, 1948. May 10th, 1948. So during World War II, Israel's not a nation. It's a state, and they've kind of congregated together, but they don't have a nationally recognized government. They are not a nation at this point. During World War II, there was places like Dachau, Auschwitz, Treblinka, that killed 6 million Jews. 6 million Jews in those Nazi prisoner of war camps all over Eastern Europe. Now, it's interesting that nation of Israel comes to life a mere 3 years later. 1948. Just in maybe what seems like the darkest hours of the nation of Israel, boom, the nation pops up again. It raises its head, and it says once again, God is faithful. He will not let these people die. Now, did a lot of Jewish people die? Yeah. But the nation as a whole remains intact. The Old Testament, the New Testament tell us throughout that there will always be a remnant of Jewish people still intact that still want to honor God and still reverence God. And so we see that happening. And it's interesting because God is truly faithful. God does what God says He's going to do. Now, there's another thing here that I want to draw your attention to that is about God, and that Habakkuk says that God is his security. And he says it this way. He calls him his rock. You're my rock. Now, there are some people in your family probably that you rely on for strength and for keeping things together and keeping us pointed in the right direction. And during adversity and really troubled times, sometimes you just lean on them, and they are the rock of the family, aren't they? They are the rock. They keep their emotions in order. They don't go crazy. They don't make harebrained decisions. They just are solid people. Habakkuk says that God is that person for him. Now, if you have any other rock, I would suggest that you replace that rock with God. Because God is eternally consistent. He is holy. He is your security. Now this rock, when you think about rocks, you think about several things. One is permanence. Rocks just don't go away. You know, you have some maybe limestone stuff that kind of disintegrates. But when you think about the kinds of rocks, and somebody help me, what is an igneous rock? Anybody know what an igneous rock is?
Yeah, it's made by, exactly.
Made by fire.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, and they're very solid, aren't they? They're solid rock. And so God is, what Habakkuk is saying is, God, you are permanent. You're my stability. You're my security in a time and a place of great danger. Security, permanence, stability in a time of great danger. I know that there's danger around us, but God, you are my rock. Now, what a joy to know that we have a safe place to go when things don't go right in our world, huh? What a great thing to know that God is our rock. Now, with all of this said, and if you gloss over this passage of Scripture and just read it real quickly, you don't understand really quite what Habakkuk is saying. So he's saying, God, you are all of these things, and I know all of this stuff about you. Man, but now we come to the second thing that he expresses, and that is that he expresses concerns about what God is doing. He expresses concerns about what God is doing. Now, he has already said, God, I know who you are, but it doesn't seem as if your actions are consistent with your character. And so help me with that. Help me understand. Now, when you wrestle with God, I always want you to start with telling him who he is. Okay, he is holy. He is eternally consistent. He is your security. He is faithful. When you say all of those things to God and then you say, but I don't understand, it puts you in a lot different position rather than when you come to God and you accuse him. And you say, God, you apparently don't know what you're doing. God, you really don't see things correctly. God, you should see things from the way I see things. When you come with arrogance, God is not nearly as prone to answer your questions because he really wants to work on your character. He wants you to first know who he is, and then you have a much better understanding of what he's doing. So he'll always bring you back to that place where he wants to express to you and expose you to who he is. Once you know who he is, then you can come to him with respect and you can say, I don't understand. Much different stance. Okay, so he comes to him with concerns. He expresses his concerns this way. In chapter 1, verses 13 through 17, he says this: You who are of purer eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? You are make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings all of them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his dragnet. So he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his dragnet. For by them he lives in luxury and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his nets and mercilessly killing nations forever? Now, Habakkuk has heard the cure, right? He's heard the cure. He says, we've got this disease in our land, and now that you've expressed your there's a bug flying on my face. There's all this stuff going on in our land, and now you've caused this to be, you have a remedy in mind, but it seems like the cure is worse than the disease. Have you ever wondered about that sometimes? You know, the solution is worse than the problem. And so that's what Habakkuk is saying. The solution seems worse than the problem. Because good people are going to get messed over by bad people. Now, does that seem right to you? That good people get messed over by bad people? Doesn't seem right, does it? But I'm going to draw your attention to some things here about what God is saying. Now, Habakkuk really knew the answer to this thing. And I don't have it in your outline, but I do have it right here, and it's found in I think it's found in 28. Yeah, Deuteronomy 28, verse 25 and 32 through 34. So write those down, because this is what God has already proclaimed to the nation of Israel. At the first part of 28, he talks about these blessings of obedience. If you obey me, you're going to receive these blessings. But in verses 15 and on, he talks about the curses of disobedience. And here's what he says in verse number 25 and then 32 through 34. He says this: "The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You shall go out one way against them and flee 7 ways before them, and you shall be a horror to all the kingdoms of the earth." Now, is that pretty straightforward? He says, if you don't obey me, if you don't follow me, if you don't do the things that honor me, here's the curse that's going to happen to you. Your enemies are going to overtake you. You're going to go out to fight them in one direction, and they're going to scatter you in 7. And so God says that this is the warning. Now, this is well before this time of Habakkuk. In verse 32, he says this. In verse number 32, "Your sons and your daughters shall be given to another people, while your eyes look on and fail with longing for them all day long. But you shall be helpless. A nation that you have not known shall eat up the fruit of your ground and all of your labors, and you shall be only oppressed and crushed continually, so that you are driven mad by the sights that your eyes see." Now, does that seem pretty straightforward? God has already said when the nation of Israel was being formed, if you follow me, good things will happen. If you don't follow me, your enemies are going to come and overtake you. They're going to oppress you. Your sons and your daughters are going to be taken into captivity. All of this bad stuff will happen to you. Now, God has to do that, doesn't he? Because he's already promised that he would do it. And Habakkuk already has recognized that God is faithful, right? Faithful means that God keeps his promises. And God has promised, if you don't follow me, if you become disobedient to me, these nations are going to take you over. Your enemies are going to take you over. God must do it in order to remain faithful, right? We often think of faithfulness as just doing nice things to people. But faithfulness is keeping your promises. When you tell your kids, if you do that again, I'm going to spank you. You got to spank them, don't you? When they do it again, you got to spank them, because you want to be a faithful and true parent. If God didn't keep his promises, what he would be is a parent like we see often that says, if you do that again, I'm going to tell you don't do that again. And then I'm going to tell you don't do that again. And then I'm going to tell you don't do that again. And pretty soon, the word is meaningless, isn't it? Because it has absolutely no value. And so God must keep his promises. He has promised that he's going to do this. So Habakkuk has some concerns about this, but he should have well known ahead of time what God was going to do. It's kind of interesting in our world where good becomes evil and evil becomes good, huh? I was reading a couple of days ago about this guy. He was an evangelist, an American evangelist, and he went to Glasgow, Scotland. And in Glasgow, Scotland, he did some interviews. And in the interviews, they were asking him, and whenever a Christian person of any notoriety gets before a media crowd, always the question of homosexuality will come up. Because they want to inflame the thing, and they want to misrepresent the Christian view. And so they asked him, and here's exactly what he said, and I wrote this down so that I would not misquote him. He says, "Your homosexuality is the least of your problems. Your problem is your heart." Okay, a heart that is not submitted to God is what he's implying. Okay, the problem is not behavior, and whatever your behavior is. Did you know that homosexuality is a sin punishable by hell? Did you know that? Okay, did you know that? Okay, did you know that gossip is too?
Yes.
Did you know that lying is too? Did you know that all of our bad habits are the same thing? And that's what he says at the end. He says, and here, let me read this. But he went on to say that homosexuality is a sin deserving of hell, but all sin is, and we have all sinned. So whatever your expression of your sinfulness is not the dividing line between us, because we're all in the same boat. That's why he has the courage to say, your homosexuality is the least of your problem. Your problem is your heart that's not submitted to God. And that's the real issue. So all of us are in this same boat. We have all sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We have all done things that are punishable by hell. And so therefore, we're all in the same boat. Now, you know what happened to this man? He was arrested. First of all. He spent the night in jail. He was fined $1,500. Because if you speak against certain groups, it's hate speech, and it's punishable by whatever crime. You know, the United States is getting there today. We are getting there today. And so therefore, this whole idea of morality and immorality, gets so mixed up, and we have lost sight of all of us are sinners. All of us have gone our own way. We all deserve the punishment of hell. And it's only the grace of God and the forgiveness through Jesus that saves us from all of that. And that's the real issue. Not what we've done, not what we haven't done. That's not the issue. But things are getting so jumbled that pretty soon we won't be able to call sinners sinners. And we will lose the ability to declare the message and the life-giving salvation that comes only through Christ. And I find that a harrowing kind of an event. Now, Habakkuk doesn't understand some things here. And let's go real quickly through these things that Habakkuk does not understand. Oh, sorry, I didn't. Well, okay, don't pay any attention to what's up there. Okay, first of all, Habakkuk doesn't understand God's seeming inconsistency. His seeming inconsistency. Now, is God inconsistent? No. You know what Habakkuk's problem is? He's fallen victim to this game that we all play, and it's the game, I'm not as bad as whoever. I'm not as bad as they are. Therefore, God should punish the most wicked, and the less wicked he should let kind of slide. But God doesn't play that game. In fact, God doesn't have that rule. You know what God's rule is? God says that there is righteousness and there's sinfulness. There's righteousness and there's sinfulness. And he doesn't play the game of degrees. We play the game of degrees. And if I can perform a little better, then I should get a little better deal. And God does not play that game. And this game goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. Remember Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden? Okay, Eve goes and she takes the apple and she eats some and she gives some to her husband. And God says, hey, what's up? And what does, I love Adam. Adam becomes the man of the family here. And he steps right up. And what does he do? He blames his wife. Okay, he takes full responsibility and blames his wife. He says, it's this woman you gave me. So he plays the blame game. It wasn't me. And my kids were famous at saying, it wasn't me. All I had to do was get the word who out of my mouth. It wasn't me. What's that say about me? But here's Adam and Eve, and God comes and God says, Adam says, it wasn't me, it was Eve. And what does Eve say? Oh, it wasn't me, it was the serpent. And I can imagine all the time that conversation is going on, the serpent just smiles. He says, yeah, it was. But we play the blame game. We don't take responsibility for our own things. I was reading this last week where they have this new technology, and it's a sensory technology. And if you touch this thing in your car, it has a sensory device in it, and it can tell how much alcohol you've drank. And so if you drink too much alcohol, it won't start. And everybody's going, man, this ought to be in every car in the world. And I agree, it ought to be in every car in the world. But here's what I fear. I fear that it removes us one more step from taking personal responsibility. Now, what happens? Okay, I can drink all I want. Oh, my car won't start. Oh, well, I'll have to get a ride home. Oh, well, it did start. It started, so therefore I must be okay. Now, what if that sensor is bad? Now I go out and I kill 4 or 5 people, and I sue the manufacturer because the manufacturer device failed. I don't take responsibility anymore. It just seems like things are removing us further and further and further from personal responsibility in decision making. So today, here's what we have. We have to take responsibility for what we've done. And it's not a matter of degree, because we've already established how many of us have done something deserving of hell. All of us have. We've all done something deserving of hell. And it's only because of the grace of God and the forgiveness through Jesus Christ that we ever escape that. So we get into this game, though, still and say, well, what about so-and-so? In fact, Peter even says that. Jesus at the end of his time on earth is telling Peter, you're going to die a crummy death. And he says, oh yeah, but what about my buddy John over here? What about him? Well, that's none of your business. What I have planned for him is for me and him. It's not about you. But here's what's going to happen to you. Taking personal responsibility, not what about so-and-so. And like I said, there are no varying degrees of sinfulness with God. There is sinfulness and there's righteousness. We've all done enough to deserve hell. Let us not think better of ourselves than of other people, but let us still be able to declare to people that it is our sinfulness that separates us from God. Okay, so he misunderstood that. Another thing that he misunderstood was God using the cruel to punish the vulnerable. Okay, God using the cruel to punish the vulnerable. Still doesn't work. Okay, keep. You're gonna hook me up there? Thank you. Okay, now there's a couple of things that are used in the scripture here. Back in verse number, I want to say 15. Yeah, and it says this, verse 14. You make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. Okay, so he's saying, okay, now all of these people that are going to be taken captive, are fish. Okay, he's using a little picture here. Okay, don't worry about it if it's going to do that. Okay, he brings them up with a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in his drag net, so he rejoices and is glad. Okay, so what he's saying is the Babylonian kingdom is going to just fish all the people, all the people of Judah, and he's going to take them, and he's really going to just annihilate them. Now, he uses two things here. One he uses is a hook. The other is a net. Now, the net may be an allusion to this Babylonian sculpture that shows this Babylonian god with a great net scooping up fish. And it was a symbol of the Babylonians' empire and their ability to overtake their enemies. Now, that's kind of an interesting thing. And it also talks about this hook. Now, when the Babylonians would, then this is an actual practice of the Babylonians, when they would take people captive, they'd put a hook through their lower lip and they would pull them along. Yeah. Well, now we say, ow. Would it hurt? I don't know. I see people with all kinds of face piercings and it doesn't seem to hurt them. But it's still kind of it lacks a bit of dignity to be pulled around by that. I'd have to imagine that. And so now when he says all of that stuff, it gives us this kind of picture of what the Babylonian Empire is really all about. And Habakkuk recognizes that they're not just taking people captive to take them into their land to be productive. They're taking them captive, they're killing them, they're doing things just because they can, just because they have power. And that's what he does not understand. But yet, he has failed to, be careful, don't fall. He fails to recognize that God doesn't see varying degrees of sinfulness. Either you have failed, you've committed sinfulness, or you've done a righteous act. And so therefore, he hasn't quite put all of that together. Now, he also, I'll get to the right page here in a minute. He also doesn't understand God using idolaters to accomplish his purpose. Okay. Now, idolatry means worshiping anything other than God. Worshiping anything other than God. And do we have idolatry in the United States of America? Yeah, we do. What do we worship? We don't have these things that we go to and bow down and kneel before a lot. But we do have success. We do have money. We do have power. We have all of those things that we might worship other than God. Now, it's kind of interesting when you think about that. Let's say that the government were to come in and say, okay, you have to give up one of two things. You have to give up either your local church or you have to give up your job. Which would we do? I dare say that many, many people in the Christian church would say, I'll give up my church because I can get another one. I'll give up my church because I can go to another one. If I give up my job, I might not find another one. And I don't know if that's a fair question. I don't know if it's a fair analogy. But it may cause us to wonder. It may cause us to wonder. And it might be a good exercise for us to kind of struggle with a little bit. To say, because giving up your church, it may not necessarily be giving up God. However, if that's the church where you find God, if that's the church where you connect with God, then that might be something worth holding on to. That's all I'm saying. Okay? So, idolaters. Now, he doesn't understand another thing, and that's God allowing senseless violence. Senseless violence. Now, in verse 17, the picture is killing to kill, not killing to conquer. The Babylonians were just going to come and kill and kill and kill and kill because they wanted to exert their power. They had power. That's the way they showed their power, was they would just come and kill. Now, it's one thing to kill to conquer, I guess, or kill to establish your land, or kill to protect your land. Those are different things. But killing just to kill, and do we see something like that in our world today? Yeah, we see killing to create terror. We see killing to create this image of terror, and thusly avoidance on their part to just, let's just forget about that. Let's not do that, or let's be coerced, or whatever. Let's cooperate with what this powerful force wants to do, just so that we don't incur their power. Okay, so it would be kind of like fishermen catching fish, not to eat, but just to chop up and throw back. Just to chop up and throw back. That's the picture that he gives us here in this fisherman picture that he has. Okay. Well, there's another thing that Habakkuk expresses, and that is his anticipation of God's response. Now remember, he has come, he's recognized who God is. He says, God, you are this. But God, I don't understand these things. And now, God, I'm going to patiently wait for your response. Now that's the respectful way to wrestle with God. He says it in verse number 1 of chapter 2. I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. Everyone's worst nightmare was experienced by Edmund Gravely's wife. They were flying a two-people plane. He's flying along, and he died at the flight controls. Only his wife, she doesn't know how to fly. She immediately gets on the radio, and she's calling everybody she can. She's trying to connect with some air traffic controller, and she's trying furiously, this one. She needed help. She was in a desperate situation, and eventually the plane crashed. However, she had made contact with several air traffic controllers who could have helped her, but were unable to. Why? Because she wouldn't stay on one channel long enough for them to respond. If she didn't hear them immediately, she switched to another channel and another channel and another channel. Several of them heard her. None could respond to her because she was impatient. Habakkuk here shows us, God, I know who you are. I don't understand what's going on, but I will patiently wait for you to respond. That needs to be the end of our wrestling with God, where we patiently wait for God to respond, where we don't pound on him and pound on him and pound on him and pound on him and say, you got to tell me now, you got to tell me now, you got to tell me now. Because when we are speaking, we are unable to hear. When we're speaking, we're unable to hear. Habakkuk shows us his determination to do right by waiting for God to answer.